Today is a new day. The storm is finally winding down. Roads are opening up. We're just about fully demobilized. Our hot wash is in 30 minutes with Andy, the administrator. Let's get this room cleaned up before he gets here.
Hi all, I wanted to come in and say thank you so much for your work over the past 3 days. You did a terrific job managing this response. I know this was hard and you're tired. But because of this team leading the response, we were able to keep our focus on patient care. What do you need most right now? While I have the year of leadership, I'd like to bring documentation from this incident and any other recent events to see what I can do.
I know I mentioned before that I'd like more emergency response training. I'd also like to mention that the initial assessment checklist was amazing. How can we get more tools like that?
I agree, it would be great to make some kind of quick reference guide version our communication plan. We had so much on our plates that we may have missed a few things that didn't help with our rumor control problem.
Andy, I know we've talked about this before, but investing in preparedness pays a million times over during response. We can do this, we just need a little more bandwidth and time, and it would be great to talk this over with you at our next EP committee meeting.
I think I'm double booked that day, sorry that keeps happening. But anyway, your comments are really helpful for my report to leadership. I can't wait to see your full after-action report with all the juicy details on successes and areas for improvement.
No problem, I'll connect with you to see about a better time for the EP committee meeting so you can make it. We will be sure to get the after-action report to you. Thank you so much for your time today, Andy. Stick around and have celebratory cookies with us. And I hope everyone else gets some well-deserved sleep tonight. We will continue conversations as I work on the after-action report. Thank you. Go team.
Our friends at the federal government who created the incident command system structure has very distinct communication banners or phases when we are responding. So if it's new to you, they start out with an alert. It's very similar to like a tornado watch or a warning. It precedes the event. One is, a watch and a warning have different meanings, but an advisory, that's the first phase. An advisory is no action yet, just want to put a heads up. And then there's an activation and a deactivation, right? So if you say we have activated our incident command system, formally, if you do it in an email or however you declare it, there should at some point be we've now deactivated all clear. So it starts out advisory. Sometimes you get to activation or not. Sometimes you don't even have the opportunity for an advisory and you activate. And once you've activated, you update people using an alert. Here's new information while we're responding. Here's new information while we're responding. Here's new information while we're responding. Before you hit all clear, there's a section called recovery. And it's where you are demobilizing. It's where the event is starting to slow down. It's where you're not asking for more resources to respond. You're now getting on top of. You're getting control of the event. The challenge, if you simply go from activation to all clear, is that there are typically some groups that are part of your response. There are certain Avengers that are part of your response team that if you all clear, their lives are just as disrupted as they were when we were activated. Here's an example. Working for a children's hospital, there was a busload of children that supposedly were very sick. There was maybe a GI issue that was affecting all of the children, and they were coming to the hospital, all 36 of them. It was a trip maybe from a school visiting Boston. Out they come. So we say, okay, this is a significant event. Let's activate. We're all ready. We have our vests on, and in come the patients. And they all walk off the bus. They all look right as rain, and they walk into our ED. And someone says, oh, this is actually not an event. We're all clear. Unless you're the ED social worker, who now has the responsibility of reunifying all of these kids with their family members who are very concerned that they got brought to a hospital in the bus. And the point of the story is that there was an opportunity that was missed where we could have said, We are recovering. ED, back to normal operations. The social work group, we're going to take over the staff lounge, and that's going to be where we're going to hold all the well kids as they get cleared quickly from the ED until they're allowed to go home. We're going to need child life, we're going to need a registration person, we need eyes on clinically, and we have social work in there. And so the importance of recovery as a designated phase is one that I think is the more advanced version of response in your organizations.
We got picked up a Wi-Fi, so I have to troubleshoot. The question was what's most critical when demobilizing? Do you want to do that one verbally?
Sure.
Play with it verbally?
Yep.
But
So did everybody hear Mia?
So when you're ready to go to the next slide,
So if you are demobilizing, what's the question exactly? So that I
what's
can,
most critical when demobilizing?
what is most critical when demobilizing? So there are some rules around demobilization. I said that you can use these banner headings and you could say that we are going into recovery or we are demobilizing. You can formally announce it during your operational briefing. But let's say that you have a team of people from logistics. You have some supply chain people that are part of your operational briefing because we were worried about running out of linen, but we are demobilizing. And so not just Larry's Linens for Less, but the regular linen vendor just said we can get through. And so part of our concern that had the supply chain folks involved is no longer a concern of ours. So how do we demobilize them? What's the actual process?
Just say it out loud. We'll pick this up.
Yeah.
There has to be a communication plan. You may want a little bit of overlap so you don't have a loss of supplies during that time.
Yep. So we need to make sure, are we tracking all the supplies? Are we just talking about the lead supply that we were worried about? They're typically, a representative from supply chain is communicating our burn rate, what we currently have on hand, when we expect to be out of whatever this important item was. And we are now saying we should have sufficient supply in order to last us if we are anticipating that we are going to be all clear at a certain time, or when our vendor's going to come back in. You formally ask for permission to demobilize, right? So the supply chain person under logistics would say, given this information, we're going to stand down our response, and they need to be granted permission in order to actually stand down and not be a part of the formal operational brief. Logistics knows that they've made this request. It goes up to the incident commander if needed, or the incident commander simply gives the section chiefs the ability to shut down things that are no longer needed if they're high enough level leaders. And that way, you don't have anybody that disappears from your response team without you knowing it. Marketing and communications is one of the last teams to be let go. Even if they haven't sent out a message in a while, they need to bookend the message with the all clear. And so it might be like, well, I haven't done anything in a while. I guess they're done with me. You want to try to change that in your organization. Do you want to do this, Menti? Are we back online? Oh, okay. Any other ideas about when demobilizing? What is critical when demobilizing your response? Yes?
You have to tell people that the process has changed, so if there's people in the chain that had to, like I had to go to a different place to get my linen because I no longer have to go to that place, so I have to tell the people that are doing that.
Right. Stop doing that special that special process that we were telling you before. Sometimes when we're short on supplies, we lock them down and you have to go to a special room or like the stat room in order to sign out a box of gloves if we're running short on gloves or saline, whatever that normal process is. When we get to the other side, when we're flush with it again, we can go back to normal operations. And you need to be told that that process has been reversed. Great point.
You record the dates for billing purposes, so then it can be coded out differently.
It should make your significant events when you are deactivating various teams, right? Your log of activities. What else?
I was thinking if you rented any equipment or any temporary staff or any of that stuff, you would want to close that out.
Absolutely. When we get into IT disruptions and we go to paper and we have downtime and we are now demobilizing, it's super important that we define what our recovery processes are going to be, whether it's returning stuff or getting paper records into the billing system and formalizing the documentation, or scanning in the paper records and appending them to the actual live medical record. These are great. And hot washing. Okay. What is a hot wash? Anybody? Is that the debriefing? Yeah, so we're going to start talking about the actual formalized debriefing. So as a paramedic, I always used to think, or I was taught very early, you find sick people in the field and you bring them to the finish line, which is the emergency department threshold. And anybody who works in the emergency department knows that that's not the finish line, that's the starting line. And it's just a chain of events, right? And so when we get to a demobilization and we actually all clear, what we want to do, if able, before we call, okay, go home, we actually want to capture feedback while it's still fresh. We call it a hot wash. It's more, there's a lot more feeling or emotion to it because you haven't had the time to process all the things that have happened. So typically the way it's facilitated, it doesn't typically come with the ability to have a timeline written out where you can see it, but you go around the room of the people that are responding, what's one thing that went well and something that needs improvement. You just want to get the basic information coming out of the group during a hot wash. And you want to have a recorder or just record the session. If you're doing it on Teams, let everybody know you're recording it. That's another way of being able to capture all that good information. But you want to have everybody participate, introverts, extroverts, everybody. What went well, what needs improvement. And you can do this after a real event. You can do it after an exercise. You can do it after a tabletop. It's a great practice. It's different than the after-action participant review session. This one is scheduled. We're going to have this at a time when many of the leaders who were part of the incident management team, when the Avengers that we're gathering are available. This one, you want to have an agenda for. You can have a timeline for this one. You, as the incident management whisperer, may or may not be the best person to facilitate this conversation. There might be really sensitive stuff that you anticipate is going to come out. You might identify something that went sideways during your response, and it's going to be, a Hatfield and McCoy issue, something that's old in your organization that you don't necessarily want to be the person that's, you might pick that person in your organization who wasn't even part of the Avengers, but is really great at facilitating delicate conversations. You could bring that person in, give them advanced notification, and they might be able to facilitate this conversation. But typically during this conversation, you want to ask these 4 questions. What was supposed to happen? What occurred? What went well? And what can the facility do differently to improve? I had said earlier this morning that one of the things I value most about the emergency management or emergency preparedness role is that you're a continuous improvement professional in your institution. And I made the caveat that I said that you're an institutional improvement person specifically for your ability to respond. I think a lot of the stuff that ends up in this and this conversation might in fact be part of your organization, even outside of emergency management. And we'll get to a continuous improvement or rolling plan in just a second. But back to this after actions participant review session. Another important thing to remember here is that everybody that responded is likely tired. And even if they had an opportunity to go home and feed the dog or the cat or sit with family and get some sleep, you don't want to re-trigger people while you're trying to figure out what broke and what could be better. And so being sensitive to some of those conversations and having a plan on how to facilitate and bring up what needs improvement. Not, hey, what did we think when Steve made this call? You want to try to de-emphasize the person and talk about the role, and it typically fits into a training issue, or we don't have a plan for that, or we have a plan and we do have training but we haven't exercised it. We want to try to figure out what we could be doing in our organizations to prevent that particular, untoward event from happening again. I am human, just like everybody else in the room, and I make mistakes every day. Your after actions and hot wash processes are your promise to your organization to try to make new mistakes. You will make mistakes. Your organization will make mistakes. What you want to try to do is capture the ones that are going to be influenceable and do something about it before it happens again. So long term, we want a continuous improvement or rolling improvement plan. So a rolling improvement plan, I don't have a visual for you here. Typically, and there are examples in the, do you want to say?
Yeah. Remember back at the beginning of the day, I said there's a workshop Google Drive, and actually on page 3 of your participant guide, there's that QR code also, so you can go get it. There's 4 files. Why is there 4? We gave you 2, the participant guide and the resource guide. The other 2 are, one of them is a rolling improvement plan. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't have the quick, we would add a column if you want for what he's about to talk to about the quick hits. You'll know what he said, what I mean in a second. But the idea is out of your after action participant review sessions, and once you go through a process to identify what your improvement items are, which again, it's not just everything that everyone says, just because you said it's a thing doesn't mean it's a thing we should improve, but you analyze, you come up with your list of improvement items, put them in a spreadsheet first before you put them in your Microsoft Word document, that's the report, right? So then after every incident or exercise, you have a spreadsheet with those items. And then some additional columns to help make it a rolling improvement plan, including when you can close it out. So that's the 3rd file. It's an Excel spreadsheet in that Google Drive. And the 4th, while I'm talking, the 4th file is a simple after action report template that has the 5 items you're required to meet for a CMS after action report. It's the 4 items shown here, plus the 5th is like a timeline, I think the schedule and who's going to make the improvement. So that's the 4th item that's there on the Google Drive if you don't already have a nice AAR a report that you like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So where is that? It's there. So hot washes and after action reviews. Who is actually participating in the after actioning? It's the response team. If you have frontline leadership, maybe it was that person that came through and said nice things to everybody while they were responding. If you want that C-suite presence in your hot wash, that's a great opportunity if they're willing to do it. They absolutely should be the receivers of the net of what you find out from these 2 events. Frontline and support staff, you can do a poll out to your organization. You can consider an experienced facilitator. You want to talk about strengths and areas for improvement. And you want to capture the feelings, emotions, and opportunities while it's still fresh. And you also want it to be structured, and so you can capture the thoughts once people have had a chance to think more critically and rest. If you are identifying an issue in both the hot wash and in the after action review process, it's because it really happened, right? It's unavoidable because it came out in both places. And then as you're doing any kind of interviews with individual people, you're going to hear it again. The more you hear it, whether it's a real event or an exercised event, the more you hear it, the more real it is to your organization, that it really is a barrier to your response. There's some pro tips here. I won't read them to you, but what I want to try to get to is this idea of a rolling improvement plan. So before I ask you to discuss this, maybe actually I'll do it the other way around. Rather than give you what I do, I'd love to hear from you all if you are if you have quality assurance or improvement responsibilities within your organization. How do you use the improvement plan? These are the things that we have to work on after response, after recovery. It's back into mitigation and preparedness, back to the Pokemon ball. These are the items that we've identified from having lived through this experience that we need to do improvement on. What do you all do with that list?
We keep it ongoing, we've got an agenda, and basically remove it, go through pieces as we feel we pick up
sometimes we need to put it back on, depending upon what the situation is.
So sometimes we solve the problem. Sometimes it just sits on there for so long it ages out, and maybe it's not a problem anymore, but at one point it was a problem. Those are great, by the way, if you know how to pick those. And sometimes they don't get solved, and you have to kind of put them back at the top of the pile. Is that right? What do other people do? Thank you for that. Similar?
So whenever I'm asked for something from coffee, I do a 3-month scenario. So if you ask me today or I hear about it on a meeting today, we form a subcommittee. We identify the problem, come up with ideas, and implement them. And then the second time we meet as a subcommittee, it's, did it work? So we're assessing. What do we need to change about it to roll out again? Report it to coffee, so that's our second meeting, and try again. So our committee then has 2 attempts to really make it right with the team and all the stakeholders on the floor, report back to coffee and get more direction from the leadership group if we're not going the right direction. So then it doesn't table a lot.
So what I heard there is there's a deliberate attempt, and I think it's a particular type of issue that then needs a team around it, and it becomes, what I'm hearing is a project. Yeah. And I would argue that your improvement items fit into 3 categories, and they don't distribute themselves equally. They are quick hits. You or you plus one person can solve that issue within 14 business days. That's a quick hit. The second is a complex event, what did I call that? Complex item. And that you're going to need 60 days. You're going to need more than one person. You might need your committee. And the last is a project. And a project is typically, I need greater than 90 days. And if you're finding that you have projects that you can't get to ground, it is because it is a system issue. It's not because you're bad at your job or you didn't pick the right people. It's because it's actually a problem in your organization that you could probably, if you brought it to senior leadership, find evidence outside of your event that it's actually a problem. It's still a problem whether it's in your event or outside of your event. And that's where I think you need senior leadership's greatest attention. That's where if you're creating a quarterly or a once a year report to your senior leadership and you're saying, these are the number of events we had and these are the trainings that we did, and here's our percentage of our rolling improvement plan that we've been able to get to ground, and oh, by the way, for the projects that we identified, these are the ones that we were unable to close out. And we need your help. We need to be part of your capital budgeting plan, or we need to consider an additional resource, or we need to consider a reallocation of someone's job responsibilities, because this is important enough and problematic enough that as an organization, it will happen again. And if you're communicating to your senior leadership with that level of specificity and that level of clarity, 1, it will happen again, and there's only so many times that they can receive a report that says, I'm telling you, we're going to have another event. I don't know when, I don't know what its flavor is, but we're going to register this problem again. And when it happens, if letting no disaster go unused, if you're able to say, and by the way, where are we with the request for an additional resource or the purchase of this new thing, or it's where I think the quality improvement or continuous improvement officer inside of each of us actually gets the buy-in from our senior leadership in a way that they just can't run away from it. They can't ignore it. If we tell our organization if it's going to snow and if it's going to snow enough that we all need to be concerned about it. Once you take your job and turn yourself into a weather person, you will marginalize your influence. But if you turn yourself into a quality improvement person and turn the data into visuals and speak with specificity about where the gaps and opportunities are within your organization, you become more than an insurance policy. You become part of the organization's continuous improvement process. For the QAPI, for the folks that do QAPIs who have like a performance improvement background, What has worked for you when you're trying to change something? It doesn't matter, hand wash, it doesn't matter what it is, central line infections. What is a strategy that you've used successfully to not just get people's awareness, but to actually change performance in a favorable way? Yes?
I mean, we have coffee meetings on the floor, so if I'm out there as an educator and I'm talking to the nurse manager and the manager about it, and the staff can overhear that this is a challenge, and hey, nurse manager, we're going to roll out audits for this. We're going to be looking at this. This is the training I want you to do. I'm going to do training. It's going to be real-time feedback for your staff, and I'm going to report back to you at the end of the meetings. So it's audits and accountability.
Now, I'd love to stand up here and say it's all carrots and there's never sticks, but I think you have to know when each is useful. I remember doing a fire drill so I worked at a pediatric hospital. They had 4 ICUs. This was the medical surgical ICU, and I had permission from the nurse director of the medical surgical ICU to do an unannounced fire drill with the little fire screen thingamahoo. So I didn't actually light a fire, but we put the little fake fire in the room with a mannequin in the bed. We didn't tell anybody but the nurse manager. We showed up with our vests on and cameras. And we set the fire alarm off because facilities knew, and the doors closed, and people walked by and saw that there was an event, and they kept walking. And we're like recording what's happening. It was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable to watch. It was even more uncomfortable to watch again when we showed it to the CNO, who said, I can't believe this. We've always passed our safety inspection by any of the regulatory. Our extinguishers are perfect. Our alarms go off. All the facilities features. We passed regulation, but we were unprepared to actually move a patient based on the training. And so having these hard looks and making people feel uncomfortable in a way that can be supported, because nobody wanted, right? So the example I gave was that the NASCAR folks that they change tires and put gas into a vehicle in like 45 seconds. They can change 4 tires, fuel a vehicle, and off it goes. They're so good at that because they do it over and over and over again. And the people that we recorded on that day weren't a NASCAR pit crew, because they had never really done anything but answer some questions in an online environment. And the point there is that I think in order to create the kind of positive change that you're talking about, you need to be able to push people to where they feel uncomfortable sometimes. And the QAPI process, the continuous improvement process, can sometimes, depending on how you utilize it, be a source for good. So, other strategies that you've used for continuous improvement within your organization? Yes?
I want to say something to what you just said, because it's sort of like a thorn for me, is that when you're talking about that, like the training and practice and all that, in emergency preparedness, in my opinion, most of the time, online training is not sufficient most of the time. It may be a kickoff, it may be an addition.
It's a valuable tool, it's just not the whole answer.
So, but there's some opinions on that, higher rung of the ladder that's like, well, just hand out, assign some classes. You've got it covered. Assign some modules, And I don't have a good comeback.
I can tell you.
Other than talking about muscle memory and I'm trying to find statistics. So we were one of our communities was cited for that, and they're like, oh, we do it on our lives. Well, it's not specific to your community. Yeah.
So that's what you have to do.
That's true too. Yeah. It just bounces back on me. Unless you get cited, I guess, right?
Anybody else have an offering to, how do you solve the e-learning is highly accurate as to who took it and when, but not entirely effective in creating the skill, developing the skill or the muscle memory in order to respond? Anybody else have a rec?
Listen to it. They just put it on and then click through it.
I can click it enough times that I'll finally get it right. I'll give it to my kid. They'll. Yeah.
So I actually created an outline that goes along with the modules, and the painful thing is you have to listen to it yourself to get through it. But it's each module that you have to listen to, and then it's like a note-taking section. So how does this apply to our community? And I put that in our education file. So I've got the online version plus their application of the knowledge. Then you know that they listen to it, then you know that they can apply it to your community.
I love that. Learning designer, I can't sit beside that.
He's coming out of the bench.
But I wonder, I'm happy to talk offline. I don't know if this would work, but when I think of learning design, it's usually just three things, right? KSA, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes, is what you're learning in the training. Something that's online, you might be able to do knowledge, because I just need to know some stuff. And again, particularly with note-taking, of things to reinforce or make sure that people are actually paying attention, all of that actually pertain to knowledge. I think yeah, so knowledge you can do online with something to note-take to help with knowledge retention. Maybe what might help is saying, well, what are the things that we're teaching that are in the skills space? Because the skills space, again, are you thinking of any specific trainings? Like one come to mind?
Fire extinguisher. Just
Fire
watching a
extinguisher.
video on how to use
Perfect
it.
example. There's something kinetic there, right? There's a skill that there's nothing that can replace. I need to teach someone how to touch the thing, and it's a skill, an action. If you were going to write the learning objective, your learning objectives are always have a verb, and the verb for a skill is usually an action of need. I need to know how to pull the, what would you
Pull the pin.
use the pull the pin or
Looking at a video, you don't know
right.
what it feels like to
Right.
pick it up or how much it weighs or.
Right. So if you're looking at those things that are skills, or if it's PPE and you're doing a donning or doffing, there's the actions, the learning objectives, if they're well written, which you could write them if they're not well written for the e-learning. And you're going to be doing things that imply touching and a kinetic skill. So that might help to say, you know, there's a kinetic skill-based thing there that you can't do on a computer. So the computer can get you to part of it, and attitudes is a whole different thing.
You know, I just think that it's really hard to operationalize some of that stuff.
Yeah.
For example, the fire extinguisher thing, it's not that we don't want to do it. I have 120 employees.
Yeah.
How do I operationalize getting 120 employees to get their hands on a fire extinguisher, pull the pin, squeeze it? That's really not an easy thing to do. Do I see the value in it? 100%.
So here's where you're not alone, and if you find that you're alone, figure out who is your coalition of the willing. You have educators in your building. Some are formal and they have it in their title, and some are just damn good at communicating, and you can deputize them. You have quality assurance people in your organization. You have to, because you have to meet a bunch of regulations. Do they know who you are and what you're trying to do? They may or may not join your committee, but if you went to them and said, I'm trying to improve the hospital's awareness of blah, and here's my data, what are some strategies? Those are folks that might be able to help you. I'm aware of institutions that create evacuation Olympics. They make the experience of practicing a full building evacuation fun. They break out into teams. There's carry a 5-pound bag of flour in the little neonatal apron down a flight of stairs. You have to then run with your teammate to the thing and practice the pull, aim, squeeze, however it would work in your organization. But getting that leadership buy-in, right? I told you a story about a fire drill, and one of the things, I had the leader of that unit, but that wasn't enough, because what we needed to do was we needed to get the championship or the sponsorship of a senior executive. And I didn't send her a report. I showed her the edited film. And she couldn't unsee it. And after that, a bunch of barriers were moved, and we did a bunch of training. And sometimes that's what you need in order to get over that hurdle. But I think it's where, as continuous improvement officers, right, it's more than just holding the drill or meeting the regulation or having the big thick binder. It's, is my organization actually ready to respond? And that's why I like tuning into the threshold of early activations, because it saves me all that time of building and baking drills. I don't have to have a conversation about what if this thing happened when it just happened and we had an after actions report or after action. It already happened, right? Cotter's 8 steps of change, like create a sense of urgency, I don't have to do that. It already happened. I'm now just taking advantage of the fact that it happened. I am strategically coming in right behind it and carrying through. Okay, so that's my soapbox about continuous improvement. I think it's a great opportunity within your programs. I also think out of the legacy that you leave, whatever program you're in, you will leave it eventually, right? That's true for all of us. The state you leave it in, if you leave a quality continuous improvement process that's connected or hardwired to education and to the quality folks, that's hard to undo. It'll take a while for that to fall back to a state of inactivity. And that way you're making your organization more resilient. So if you heard something that you liked, write it down to yourself. That's Module 8.